a list here on on the right, which looks to be mostly alphabetical by first name. So why don't we just do it that way? And if you guys see that list, you'll know you're coming up and unmute. So Adam, you're up.
Hey, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Kimball. Been working in semantic web for a while, have a keen interest in BFO, use it a lot in life sciences and an allotrope, and I love it and I hate it. Both of those things sometimes equally, maybe a little bit more love, but it is kind of a pain too. So happy to be here and share this with you.
Great. And whoa, it just flipped on me. Oh, there, Dan. Dan, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Dan Carey. I'm a senior ontologist with Semantic Arts, based out of the DC area. And I'm using GIST all the time, but have only had the cursory touching of with BFO.
Oh, and Casey just showed up. Casey, we're just doing quick introductions.
Hey, I'm Casey. I'm over at Olive AI. I built the upper ontology here, which was based off of GIST, and we're interacting in healthcare stuff. There's a fair amount of BFO stuff that goes on, so interested to see how stuff merges together here. Cool.
Doug.
I'm Doug Beeson. I'm an ontologist at Semantic Arts. I've been here for about 8 months now. I don't know anything about BFO except what my pal Anthony tells me.
Very good. Eddie.
Hi, my name's Eddie. I'm a software developer here at Semantic Arts, and I have no experience with BFO either. I mainly deal with the software side of things, but I've touched on GIST, and that's mainly it.
Right. JT?
I'm JT. I'm the office manager over here at Semantic Arts, here to learn and record the meeting for future use.
Good. Jess?
I'm Jess. I'm an ontologist with Semantic Arts. Started back in September. And yeah, I'm based in Montreal, Quebec.
Great. Mark?
Mark Fiker, Colorado Springs. I'm an associate ontologist at Semantic Arts, almost 2 years now. And know absolutely nothing except how to pronounce BFO. And am just finally getting some familiarity with some of the components of GIST.
Right. Michael?
Hi, I've been using GIST for 11 years, and I'm fairly familiar with a lot of the pieces of BFO and kind of its origins. It's always been a bit of a frustration, the terminology they use.
Yep. Patrick?
Yeah, I'm a data engineer working in North Carolina with Pazer, and we use GIST all the time. I don't have any experience with BFO or other foundational ontologies.
Right. Peter?
I'm Peter Winstanley, and I'm in Glasgow in Scotland, but I originate from probably about 5 miles, 7 miles away from where Barry Smith also originates. So although I don't necessarily have full intimacy with BFO, Barry and I have drunk the same water.
You have to drink the same Kool-Aid. That's what you need. So Anthony, you clever.
Yes. We don't have Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Anthony, you cleverly put your last name first so you wouldn't get to go first, but you're up now.
Oh, how you doing, everyone? Anthony Patos. I work with Amgen. I'm based out of New York, and I've been working with BFO for a number of years, and I'm interested in this discussion today. Thank you.
Cool. Ryan, you're on mute.
Thank you much. Ryan Hoheimer, I'm an ontologist with Semantic Arts. I'm in the state of Washington, not to be confused with the other Washington on the other side. I have got my toe, about toe deep into BFO and CCO and OBO through some other ontologies I've been working with. Not enough to claim any familiarity, but enough to have gotten my toe wet, let's put it that way. And looking forward to this discussion today.
Hey, Sean?
I'm Sean Goodwin. I'm a software developer at Semantic Arts, and I'm based out of Fort Collins.
Great. And Jonathan?
Jonathan Storm, work for S&P Global out of Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm working on a small ontology project for data science at S&P Global.
Excellent, excellent. We had a couple more people sneak in. Cheryl, we're just doing quick introductions.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Dunn. I'm working with Dave on data-centric accounting. I'm a professor at Grand Valley State University in Michigan.
And Greg?
Good morning, everyone. I'm a physician in Colorado, working quite a bit on modeling ontologies and pattern language, so very interested in today's conversation.
Cool. Justin?
Hi, I'm Justin Brown. I work at CIS. Been working on a project with Semantic Arts, so figured I'd drop in and listen in.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, that's the intros. Dylan didn't make it, so Peter, I guess it's your show. What happened to Dylan?
No, it's muted.
I will text him.
I messaged him. He said it sounded like something had come up, and he asked Peter to take the floor for today.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have his deck, Peter?
No, I've got my own deck.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, we'll make the best of it. Good job, Peter. I'm sure of it.
Hello, everybody. Right. So what I want to talk about today is ontology documentation. And why today? Well, we're kind of coming close to the delivery, because that's kind of what it feels like. They're giving birth to version 11.
Hang on a second. Just truth in advertising. So are we going to talk about the GIST and BFO map, or is this a different topic?
No, this is a different thing, different topic.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize what Dylan had prepared, and I couldn't possibly step into his shoes. So he asked me to do something slightly different. Truth in advertising.
Yep. Okay.
I take it you can all hear me then.
Yeah.
It's kind of related.
Yep. So I
It's
guess
kind of related.
and anybody who came expressly for GIST and BFO, I suppose you could politely sign off. I guess we'll try and do it again next month. But I guess in the meantime, we're going to have a discussion on documentation. Is that?
This is pretty much it, Dave.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I wasn't made fully aware of what I might have got myself into had I been following in Dylan's footsteps. So are you all happy with this? Because I think it's a pretty important and interesting area to deal with. One that I'd like as a group conversation to spend a little bit of time going over, so that we've got some sort of sense of what the goals are, what the direction is, and so on. So part of the purposes of our documentation are kind of like to record what's there. And that's because we get different serializations of ontologies. They're not usually kind of presented in a documentary form. Sometimes it's difficult to kind of see the whole picture. And so there are different ways in which one can express that. The other thing then is the reference material for practitioners. We often need to be able to dip into the documentation to find things where our tooling perhaps makes it a little bit more awkward for us to see parts of the ontology and how they relate to each other whilst we're actually at work with it. Then there comes the stage that many of us have been through, where we need training materials for the early stages of a journey. And this has got particular requirements, but I still think that they're kind of incumbent on those generating, publishing ontologies to kind of help people into it gently. But I'm interested in your opinion on this and would like to see if these things are all mutually exclusive, or whether or not there's some particular way in which we can kind of meld them together. And finally, I think sometimes we need to be able to do a quick survey of an ontology in order to decide, are we going to actually pick it up, or is it something that is better off left and untouched. And here what we're taking a look at is not only the capability, but we also need to be able to think about, well, what's the degree of support that we get? How is this an ontology that's under maintenance? Now, an awful lot of times when people document ontologies, they put something through Daniel Garijo's Widoko tool. And that gives us these sort of links to documentation that's been abstracted from the ontology. And it's split up into classes and object and data properties and so on, occasionally named individuals. So they've dissected and laid out bare all the different component parts of the ontology and put it into a single page that you can navigate through by hyperlinks. The other thing, though, that tends to both amuse and annoy me are the kind of visualizations that you get of pom-pom balls bouncing around the screen, and you're trying to find something and work out how on earth is it related to what that's completely out of view. And then what you do is that you zoom it and find that you can't read the writing on it. So although I think graphics are important, I think also the fact that just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do or the best way to do it. And that's my highly personalized view of these sorts of visualizations. Now, you may say, well, Peter, you're just getting old. That actually, if you were really with it, you'd be up for making the most of these things, and your eyesight would be able to catch the labels as they bounce by you. But maybe not. Maybe actually I've got a point, and that we need to be careful and thoughtful about everything, in fact, so that classes kind of come in little groups, and predicates are associated with them, and we need to kind of know that, and that's helpful both from a document architecture perspective in terms of helping us use the documentation as an ancillary tool to working with the ontology, but also it's kind of important for somebody who's starting off to begin to see what the lie of the land is. So one of the things that we've been thinking about in the area of GIST is the idea that actually we've got kind of, you could call it constellations of entities, little groups that fit together. And this is perhaps a throwback to earlier versions, particularly version 9, where we had different modules. So it's still work in progress, and I'm waiting ideas for improvement, and you can pick up some sort of pre-publication MOBIs and EPUBs and things here. And I'm going to just show you through it, what we've got so far, and then realize that this thing needs a little bit of construction. It's not just automated. So what we need is the decision when we're planning the arrangement, the architecture of everything.
Somebody mute.
Somebody's
making some.
Good.
Thanks.
That it gives the authoring group the opportunity of structuring the documentation, and yet at the same time kind of automating it, or automating a significant part of the generation. So I want to invite you to a discussion on documentation, particularly with respect to GIST, and we'll take a look at the sort of things that are in here at the moment. So first of all, we've got, nicely emblazoned with our logo, our banner. So a bit of brand identity. Then some discussion, and this is preliminary, but it's all the version 11 data. So we need to have an idea of metrics, I think, in a piece of documentation about an ontology. Then the understanding that we bring things together into constellations where we have something that brings in the different elements that there are, and presents them in these kind of constellations. So you can find everything that there is in GIST in relation to the notion of contact and the predicates, and the notion of agreement and the predicates, and so on, going through and ending up with some form of things that are kind of like at the end units, but also partitive predicates and some general predicates. So that's the way that we're doing things at the moment. And there is in between here a kind of clickable table of contents to enable us to get around that way. And of course, if we use the Kindle approach, then what we can do is make our own personal bookmarks and annotations where we can, add notes, put color, various things like that. And if we were to put this sort of thing onto the Kindle platform, the Amazon platform for Kindle books, what you'd then be able to do is to get a certain amount of group insight as you see the different bits that get annotated by different people. So there's a certain benefit from the social use of books. So the questions that I would like to ask are, what do people see about the purposes of this kind of documentation versus just using the ontology with the comments and definitions and so on as it is, perhaps within a design tool? The second thing is, what sort of visualizations and at what level would people find it helpful to have? The third thing is the idea of having an EPUB or a Kindle book, a Mobi, that sort of thing, that one can add into a library of reference books, something that people would find more or less helpful than having either a PDF or an HTML page. And if so, then what are the additional kind of things that you would find helpful in this? I'm thinking here that maybe it would be useful to have chunks of examples, illustrations, discussion about potentially the ways in which people have been thinking as the ontology has developed over the years, some narrative about the ways in which different challenges that at the moment are purely documented as very cryptic notes in the GitHub issues, but maybe we've got an opportunity to expand these a little bit and to describe how it was that the ontology took the form that it did. So without any more ado, if I can, I'd like to pass it across for a group discussion on this, and I'm happy to come back in and we can review some of these slides and things if that is helpful for people.
And Peter, I do notice that 3 people have hands up, so I think
that's great. Well, as soon as I can, would you like to start that then, Mark, as whilst I finally try and extricate myself?
Sure. So first one in line is Sean.
Yeah, Peter, when you talk about constellations of GitHub or of just elements, is it sort of like documentation of taxonomy of documentation?
No, the thought that I had was that in the early versions of GIST, we had it modularized, and the modules tended to be focused around either particular entity types or particular kind of tasks, like dealing with IoT or dealing with contact or that sort of thing. And so rather than just have a purely alphabetic list of classes and properties, I felt at the start of this that it would be worthwhile to impress upon the pattern of just some of the thinking that we had in its previous modularized state, which we reverted from because of the practical difficulties of bringing in different modules. It was so much easier with a single file. Is that helpful?
Well, I'm going to press you on that a little bit. So what about actually making it a formal taxonomy that you would attach to issues that would actually be able to automate the creation of these constellations?
Well, I mean, to some extent, I've got that in terms of my dictionary of lists, and at the moment it's a bit flexible and able to be moved around for different purposes. But you're proposing that what we do is put together a taxonomic hierarchy and have it kind of RDF all the way down.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds good. It would be an interesting thing for us to do. I mean, you know, I'm really just being sort of pragmatic within my limited resources here. You know, so more getting the job done, and we'll get it done elegantly in due course. Right, I can't see the others. Mark, are you QC for the day?
Doug.
Yes, next up is Doug.
Yeah, this it looks awesome, Peter. I'm looking at that. I'm like I think a couple of other people have mentioned. I'm not much of a EPUB, you know, a Kindle book user. It'd be more probably HTML or PDF for me personally. But I like the idea of being able to use that platform to zip back and forth between the definitions, even the sort of the taxonomic view that we're looking at, and examples of how to use it. I like the idea of a recipe book that you can look for it. You can look for it by the name of the recipe, or you can look for it by the food that's in the recipe.
Right. Okay. Good. And so would you want this recipe to be one that is kind of bare bones, just given the skeleton, or do you want to give people the full aroma? What do you think would be most helpful?
Well, you know, for instance, we have some patterns that we like to use at Semantic Arts. You know, how to use IDs, how to use categories, things like that, and to have and we do, in all fairness, we do have some examples already, you know, occasionally sprinkled into the documentation. But it would be really nice to have, at minimum, one example for every class, or, you know, every property. You know, here's how this could fit in. You don't want to give away all the secret sauce, but just a little bit of taste of it.
Right. Okay. And do you see this as being part of something, as a kind of a few extra notes and an aid memoir, an implementation aid memoir for the practitioner, or do you think that there's actually a kind of didactic role for this? Do you see? Yeah, we use Pandoc, Sean. That's what's in the mix. And that's exactly what it comes from. It comes from Markdown. And so what we can do is we can export it in all manner of different ways. You're quite right. So Doug, what's the audience?
This I guess I see this as being a one little extra step up, as opposed to an entire. I don't see that we need to build an entire didactic tool with this. You know, we can charge for training for that. You know, just give people a little bit extra. Here's how to use this little bit of the ontology.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what we do is that we begin to flesh out the book as the curriculum for the course.
Right, and I think sometimes there's questions about what, let's say, what type of object property would make sense in certain cases, and you'd like to give some concrete examples of how to use GIST well, right? What are some what are some good ways of using GIST as a tool that's going to survive the long-term growth of the enterprise ontology?
Great, thanks very much. Is Michael up next?
Yeah, second the documentation for examples. Nothing worse than reading an API or reading some documentation and there's no sample code basically. And the thought that occurred to me was that many of the foundational components of just require multiple calls in any one example. So I think what you would be looking at is a kind of a bidirectional model where you've got a term or a class or whatever defined in GIST, and then a link to an example, one or more examples, because I wouldn't say there's but there's often many ways to use GIST, and all of them were legitimate. And so in many cases, we won't have one example, you might have several. And within those pieces of code, basically, there would be links back. These would be HTTP links to an online version. Basically, these are URIs where all of the things are defined. So I could jump back and forth between a website and a PDF document and an ebook, right? So then all of these things would link to each other. So one piece of code would have one to many links out, because you might be using that same example to define or to show multiple pieces of GIST, and vice versa. You would have a single entity mapped to one or more examples. And of course, all of these things should be versioned as well, because some things get deprecated, as we know. But that's the beautiful thing about URIs, right? You basically, when you click it and you go there, it says, oh, this thing has been deprecated. So even if I have an old PDF, when I go to dig a little bit better, I get the newer version, because the newer version would be the single source of truth would be online. I would imagine the HTTP versions of all of these entities.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. Anthony?
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. Okay. Well, in terms of documentation, this is an excellent idea, actually. I think anything that improves human readability is a big plus, and this is certainly one way. I would say that the ebook formats, EPUB and Mobi and others. I agree with Doug. It shouldn't supplant, let's say a small web app documentation project, for example. It should be kind of It should be supplemental to it. What I'd like to ask is, did you create or did you follow a particular schema when creating this document? And is this something that could be reusable across other documentation efforts?
So the idea here was that rather than taking the Widoko route, which is just kind of one size fits all, that actually we'd offer the opportunity for people to design their own documentation by creating a dictionary, a kind of list of lists. I can just very quickly share and show that that's built up here of a dictionary of lists, so that we can say, okay, the first thing we want to talk about is contact. Can you see it clearly?
Yes.
Right. And within contact, we want to have the following classes, and then we're going to afterwards talk about the contact predicates, and we want these ones, and so it enables the group, which in this case is the group that Rebecca chorales in to discuss GIST on a very regular basis. We say, well, how do we want to talk about this ontology? What's important? So, contact is first, then agreement, And so these are the following classes. And this is the scale of it. It's not very big, it's a couple of dozen lines. And that then enables us to take a dissection of the ontology done using already 2 and a few of the little snippets of Python, and then just pull those out, and then to stuff everything into some Ginger 2 templates in order to present the thing, and then use Pandoc to push it out as an EPUB. So we can begin to get a production pipeline together where the heavy thinking is going into the story. How are we going to present stuff? What's the order? How do we cluster things together? Which is why I talk about constellations. And so I think that it's incumbent on people publishing ontologies to have their intentions kind of fairly explicit as well. And the documentation, I believe, helps that, helps get people into the right frame of mind for working with a particular ontology, and helps them get into that frame of mind, I would say, rather quicker than just being given a big alphabetical list. But that's my kind of proposal here. This is kind of what I believe is the added value of taking the time over doing that, rather than just shoving it through something that automatically sifts things out and draws pictures.
Right. So, okay. So rather than have a schema, you basically have a list of associative arrays and then some application that ingests that and converts it to an EPUB file. Okay. And then, of course, you can have multiple different associative
you can do it other
lists.
ways.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
You can do it other ways. It's just how it developed.
All right. And also, I agree with Doug also in that I would recommend including listing in the documentation patterns and more so use cases. And I would also add,
right, okay.
And I think someone else mentioned it also, so I'm sorry to be redundant, but include a lot of visuals. I think most people have a tendency to grasp ideas better when they see a visual.
Yeah.
And that's it. Otherwise, it looks great. Thank you.
This is all really useful stuff. Very grateful. But I think it's important that we do discuss these sort of things, because quite often we're talking about it at the actual level of the ontology and not the sort of meta level that we're doing now. Thank you very much, Anthony. Patrick?
Thank you.
Hey, Peter. Great
Hi.
job with the EPUB document there. I actually like the community aspects that you mentioned, so that we can see people's notes over time. I think that's a great idea.
That would come from us deciding that we wanted to put it on the Amazon platform. What I'm saying is, Patrick, that this is one of the kind of options that you get if you make it social and join in, that you absolutely don't get from just publishing a web page.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. Also, to jump on the bandwagon of mentioning examples and patterns, I'd also suggest maybe putting some mention of some anti-patterns, many of which I have made, and I think would be very helpful to document those.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you don't have to give away the store there, but if you just mention maybe 1 or 2 of the more common misunderstandings where people would typically misuse certain things in the wrong context.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, without exposing you too much, are there any that come to your mind as being, obvious ones that really show the benefit of the anti-pattern?
I think one that I made early on had to do with misusing categories. So we had to introduce the idea of that spec entry so that I wasn't using categories as the actual thing. So maybe that would be an example. I'm not sure I'm expressing myself very well, because it's been a while since I did that.
I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, the other thing that comes to mind is when people sort of, lovingly create loads and loads and loads of predicates, and there's only one thing at the end of them. and you've got something that looks like a bottle brush, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
great.
I mean,
Thanks so
so
much.
yeah,
That's
more
really
more
helpful.
generalized points, and you know, I don't know if this is the document necessarily to go into it, but you know, as you know, in our project, we've run into some difficulties with minting of IRIs and making sure that they're unique, and you know, just
Yeah.
maybe some general pointers here and
Yes,
there
that's a really
on
useful
things,
thing, isn't it?
things like that, because minting of IRIs is, you know, a unique thing in this type of database. It's not something coming from other databases people will have to have, you know, dealt with. And so having some, you know, just some basic pointers. I mean, again, you don't have to go into a huge amount of detail, but just some basic ideas there. Also, the videos that have been done about particular topics, like for me, understanding magnitudes, the videos that you guys did, I think a whole series on that. Maybe some links to the multimedia for, you know, if we've got something on a particular topic. That was
really
hugely helpful
fabulous.
for me,
Yeah,
actually.
because you're quite right. I mean, just as a reminder for everybody, if you go to the Semantic Arts website, the GIST homepage, then down on the right-hand side, there are a good list of very helpful videos, and we do need to contextualize those when it comes to the different parts of either the ontology or the particular recipe challenge, you know, to take Doug's point. Yeah.
And then just
the
the
other
last,
thing that's really helpful is this idea of anti-patterns, and maybe we need to focus a little bit on that, and maybe a video on that is something that we could think about going forward.
that'd be great. And then just the last thing is that, you know, this looks like something that'd be great to have internally on our project, where maybe we grab, you know, a subset of the GIST ontology that we're using, and also include, you know, our own project specific ontology. And
Absolutely. I think that would be a really beneficial thing. Yeah. Because
especially
then
people
that would
writing
be
SPARQL queries.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. I like the ability to kind of like bookmark different things and add my own notes to it. And that makes, to my mind, a huge difference between that and just a web page, you know?
Yeah.
Michael.
Hi, yeah, so a few things, some echoing what others have said. One thing I would advocate, and maybe it's already part of your plan, is not so much either or, but all of these different options, Widoko, HTML. So that would be my presumption, yeah. And like Doug, I probably wouldn't use the ebook formats because I'm not familiar with it, but having these available for those who do that would probably be extremely useful. As far as examples per theme, I think that's a great idea. Jess suggested that let's look at what schema.org does. It's really nice. They put examples right in there. So it's kind of a convenient way to do it. And I think for each theme, that you have 6 or 8 or maybe a dozen different themes. So rather than having an example for every class and every property, I would start by having examples for each theme. And then maybe, so that's a dozen odd examples, and someone else mentioned diagrams. So make the triples, stick them into your dot viewer and paste that in there. And then maybe 2 or 3 examples of cross theme usages where you have 3 different things, addresses, magnitudes, and something else where it's some coherent idea. That's obviously a little bit more work. Anyways, those are just a few thoughts. Thank you.
That's really helpful. The idea of cross theme needs to be kind of chosen judiciously for it to be realistic. But exactly. If you have some ideas, maybe you could think about throwing them out to us in the next few days and see whether or not we can do something with that. If not, I think that this could be, something that has got many releases.
Yes,
as,
I think so.
Yeah. As a particular version of GIST gets into wider use.
It's really a matter of everyone who is building ontologies for our clients on an everyday basis, noticing, hey, here's a nice, simple, clean example which uses 3 different themes. I can just pull that up and maybe describe it.
Pull that up. Yeah, yeah. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Dave.
No.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to echo a couple of things again, but yeah, the first thing I thought of was get the videos linked in there. And exactly as Michael said, you wouldn't link a video to a class, but these themes are actually a nice hook to put the videos, the examples, all that kind of stuff. So that's great. One suggestion, I don't know if, I assume there's no constraint here, that certain classes could show up in more than one theme because, you know, with reuse and stuff, they probably don't right now, but you may want to think about, you know, what happens if you allow a class to show up in more than one theme just because you want to talk about it again in this context. And then two more thoughts. One of the handy things that we were doing with industry knowledge graph that I think would be a nice visual is like when you introduce a class or even a property, in parentheses, just say A, and then whatever its superclass or superclasses are. Because when you glance at things, you know, when you see it, somebody say, oh, it is one of these, you know, just in parentheses. And then finally, and maybe somebody on the call knows something about this, we were just interviewing a recruit this morning who had talked about using robot, which I haven't used, in a particular way that it sounded like you could do. Remember that experiment I was doing a few months ago, trying to do the modularization after the fact, you know, grab a handful of classes and grab everything that's attached to it and make. What if you attach that to this? In other words, there's a little button that says, oh, if you want this subset, I'll give you the full crawl and the whole thing.
Robot does do 3 types of tree shaking. And as we've found when we've been having our other conversations with Uli Sattler and others, tree shaking is not quite as sophisticated as it is with the JavaScript packaging tools yet. And we still end up getting loads and loads of classes because it's hard to know, you know, really when to cut off. Really what you want is kind of like a small ego network of the cluster that's associated with the few that you're actually using.
I would suggest the thing that causes it to give you too much is going down the tree. If somebody's interested in addresses, we need everything up the tree and everything that's in its formal definition, but we don't need the sub.
Yeah, that'd be really, really worth looking at.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is one of the things that robot does that OntoTool doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's all in there in the OWL API to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's encouraging.
There's an awful lot of things to go on there, team. And I'm obviously very grateful, but also kind of daunted, you know, because the expectations are now quite high. So I think as we were saying in the chat that Michael and I were having just then, you know, I think this is something that we do need to pivot to so that we have enhanced documentation in all different modalities and things that people can contribute to with their own examples and so on. And it looks from the conversation here that there is, you know, an appetite both for coming forward with ideas, but also potentially in using this documentation as a way of promoting GIST to people that perhaps would be stumped if you were to just give them the ontology. So can I just hand over then to Dave, and if there's anything else that you want to say in our concluding 10 minutes or so?
Well, I don't think I have anything.
Okay.
Unless anyone else has any, I'm happy to wrap, you know. I get a 10-minute break today.
Just double check. Yeah. So the only other thing is to watch out for version 11, which Dylan is going to be trussing up preparing for shipment in the
Yep.
next 24, 48 hours.
Right.
Well, in that case, thank you very much to everybody
Yeah.
for your
Thanks,
time
Peter.
and
Thanks
for your
for
suggestions.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Cheerio now. Bye-bye.
Take care.